am so excited to talk to Miss Shalonda Carlisle. How are you?
I'm fine. What about yourself?
I'm good. Thank you so much for taking time and for hanging out with us and like I said, discussing this really important topic of mental health.
Thank you for having me.
So Shalonda, do me a favor. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you do?
Okay. So I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I've been a social worker for 18 years. I received my bachelor's degree from the University of Southern Mississippi. I have a double master's from Jackson State University in social work and special education. And I'm currently finishing up my doctorate in urban and regional planning. My experience, I've worked different hospitals with homelessness, ER social work, veterans, school social work, and actually I do some volunteer work at a transitional shelter here where I provide group and individual counseling to the children and the parents. Um, what else?
That's
have
awesome.
uh,
Go ahead.
I have a private practice called Carlisle Counseling Consulting Services. I do consulting work. I've wrote a couple of books. I have a 17-year-old son that he's going to be a senior next year, and I don't know
Mm.
what I'm going to do about that. I can't stop it, but
Oh.
time is just going by so fast.
Mhm.
I love working with people. I love working with adolescents. That's one of my favorite populations because sometimes they are forgotten. You
Mhm.
know, we think they're so resilient, but they're not as resilient as we think they are.
Mhm.
A lot of people that I see in my private practice, they have suffered from childhood trauma.
Mhm.
You know, they come and we talk about things that happen um, that they have not healed from.
Mhm.
So adolescents, children, adults. I love working with people with trauma, anxiety, depression, just giving them coping skills to heal and to move forward.
Yes. So you mentioned the topic that we're going to be focusing on today, childhood trauma. You
Mm,
mentioned about all the kids that you work with, adolescents, and all of that. So I think this is going to be a very important topic. A couple of weeks ago, the professional that we spoke with, we focused on anxiety and depression. And one of the things that, from my research and from talking with professionals that I think we can find is that a lot of the things that we deal with today
mhm.
more than likely took root somewhere in that childhood period.
Right, right.
So let's just kind of jump into it. Can you tell us what is childhood trauma? What is it?
So childhood trauma could be something or experience or event that is emotionally painful or distressful to that individual. And the definition doesn't do it justice because an experience or trauma can be totally different for different children.
Hmm.
So trauma can look like the typical trauma that we typically face is bullying or death or a car accident, but we necessarily don't talk about chaotic, dysfunctional homes.
Mm.
Another one that is going to be seeping is this pandemic. Like the post-pandemic things that are coming, because with that, a lot of the kids have experienced trauma, but they have experienced a lot of vicarious trauma. And vicarious trauma is not necessarily it happened to them, but what they have seen or experienced.
Mm.
So trauma can look totally different to other people. I remember, like, things that have happened to me, and that same thing may have happened to somebody else, but it may not have been traumatizing to them.
Hmm.
So other things that can be considered trauma is racism,
Hmm.
domestic violence, abandonment,
Hmm.
grief. It could be being bullied by siblings,
Hmm.
or moving from house to house,
Hmm.
or parents having unhealthy ways that they express their feelings to their children.
Mm.
A lot of toxic verbalization that we project. People don't. well, people don't recognize how that can be very influential on how a person sees themselves as a child going on to adolescence and into adult life.
Absolutely. I've been having a very interesting conversation with some friends of mine, and we've been talking about finding, using, owning your voice, right?
Mhm.
And I was telling a good friend of mine something, when I think I was 5, like when I got baptized. And I was telling her, I told them I didn't want to get baptized because I would have had to gotten baptized in like a creek or something like that, or a lake or something. I was like, and I told them I wasn't getting baptized in that. I was going to a pool. You got to put me in a pool. So my grandparents, they drove me like 45 minutes to find a church, with a church with a pool. That's where I got baptized. And so my friend made a point. She was like, you really had your voice at that age. And I never thought about it like that. Then a couple days later, there arose an event with another friend, and I just observed an experience where she did not use her voice. And so
Mhm.
she and I had a long conversation about that. Is that could something like that, and not to, not diagnosing anyone or anything, but as an adult, when you have that inability to speak up for yourself, to show up for yourself, to use your voice, is that something that could have been developed early, like a result of some type of traumatic event as a child?
Well, if you think back to how we were raised, some things we weren't, um, parents often say you can't say this or keep your mouth closed or you'll be all right. You don't have any nerves. So when you hear things like that, was it a environment where you were able to express how you feel freely? Or
Mm,
it was just what were you told at that time? A lot of people, even now, I had a client and he suffers from anxiety and he had some suicidal ideations. And they came to me because he verbalized those suicidal ideations from school.
hmm
But he had had several conversations with his parents and family about how stressed he was and some of his concerns, but it wasn't validated.
hmm
And that can go back to generational things where you keep your mouth closed, you be respectful, don't say anything. So you had an environment where healthy conversations were told that you can kind of tell how you feel, express, but that can be considered trauma. Um, like I said, it's different to everybody.
hmm
Everybody is not able to express how they feel. It can be perceived as disrespectful. So
Ah, yeah. And so I think there are some things that's probably specific to the way we are raised that shows up in the way we're formed as adults.
I agree. People don't understand that sometimes your parenting skills or your style may not be conducive for each child.
Mm,
Sometimes, it's not a parenting book. It's not a
right.
manual. So you do the best you can, but sometimes it can have different effects on different children. Um, if you have a household where you heard your grandmother basically when she talks, she may not mean harm, but may call you out of your name or may say something that was not conducive to your spirit.
hmm
So what happens is she passed that on to her daughter.
Mm,
Daughter starts saying the same thing to her child.
hmm
Now the daughter was okay with it. She kind of adapted. She had some resiliency. But guess what? Her child started to have anxiety and depression.
mm,
And so when you go to the parent and say, hey, we're trying to work on some coping skills, and she has identified that this is very toxic to her. And
hmm
then the parent comment may be, well, that's how she always been, you
hmm
know. So sometimes I think we it depends on how we were raised. We know the do's and don'ts, but sometimes we don't stop those generational curses, I call them.
Yeah. So what can we do, Shalonda? If you're a parent, let's say this to my parents that's listening out there, and you want to do your very best not to perpetuate, any trauma in the way you're parenting your children. let's start first talking to those parents. What can they do to try to, as best as possible, avoid any inflicting any childhood trauma to their children?
Well, create an environment that the child feels comfortable coming to you with issues and concerns. And I'm gonna give my personal experience. I never received any physical discipline. My mama would raise her voice, and I was afraid.
Mm,
So when I had my child, I raised my voice, and I
mhm,
saw that it was a disconnect maybe when he was 13 or 14. And so I sat him down, because sometimes if you're not ready to receive it, it won't get better. So
mhm.
I asked him, "What can I do to help our relationship be better?" And he said, "Mama, if you can stop hollering at me."
Oh, yeah.
So I listened to him, and I made a conscious effort to change. So sometimes just having that environment where you can sit down, you can have a dinner night or a check-in night, and let your child be comfortable with expressing how they feel without a parent being defensive. So just
Mm.
asking, and making the environment comfortable where they're not fearful of telling you how they really feel.
Mm, mm. So let's say you are an adult with still with living parents, and you have identified some things that that have shown up in your adulthood as traumatic. What could that adult do to possibly address some of those things and maybe foster better relationships with their parents at this stage in life? Is it too late?
Well, that's a two-in-one question. The
Okay.
reason why it can change, I always encourage parents to talk to their parents about how they feel, how it made them feel, and also express to them is not, "I'm trying to blame you, but I'm trying to get you to understand how I feel and how we can move forward."
Mm,
You're gonna have some, parents that listen and really recognize, but you're gonna have a lot of them that become defensive. "I did this because of this." You know, Sometimes we have a hard time accepting responsibility for our actions.
mm-hmm,
It's not about the blame game. It's
mm-hmm,
about how can we improve our relationships? Because if you don't improve your relationships, it's going to be a disconnect between you and that person.
mm-hmm,
It can also have an effect on how they respond to other relationships in their life.
mm-hmm,
Sometimes we project our trauma onto current relationships because we have not healed. So
mm,
I would say actually have a conversation. I always say delivery is very important.
mm-hmm,
Start off with all the wonderful things that that particular parent has done and what you have learned, but also say, "Hey, this is where it was some concerns for me, and I
mm-hmm.
want you to know how I feel." So it's
Mm.
all about delivery.
Right, right. So for any adult that's still dealing with childhood trauma, some trauma that has happened through their childhood, still showing up today in their lives, what are some things that you would suggest for that person dealing with it? Even possibly before they go to a parent or anything like that. What do you say to adults that's trying to navigate and deal with and heal from childhood trauma?
Okay. Typically, sometimes it's about our symptoms of how we respond. Sometimes individuals don't know that they are experiencing some childhood trauma. They may start having anxiety or can't sleep, or they notice that they have outbursts or panic attacks. And then when you deep dive and you figure out what are those triggers and where does it come from, you realize, "Oh, I didn't see my dad after I was 6, and my mom never explained to me where he went."
Mm,
You started to see, like, these are the reasons why I'm experiencing those symptoms. So typically when you have childhood trauma, the way people sometimes they know, we know it was a death, we know it was bullying, but when it's a real deep dive and you're trying to go into the root of the issue, you have to figure out where it comes from so that you can work on whatever issue that you have.
mm, mm. So, Shalonda, all of this information has been really, really good. Is there anything else that you want to share to our listeners, with our listeners or our viewers, to help them with this topic of childhood trauma?
I would always say you can't heal what you don't reveal.
Mm,
So we have to have open conversations with ourselves about our feelings, why we feel that way, and not be afraid if it was with a parent or if it was with some other type of individual, expressing and sharing how you feel, so that you can move forward. Because it's not about hurting somebody else, it's about healing what's on the inside. If we start having these conversations, that's the first step to moving forward to healing from childhood trauma. Actually talking about what is it that is bothering me,
Mm.
figuring that out first.
Awesome. Awesome. Shalonda, I appreciate it. I thank you so much for taking time and sharing with our listeners. Listen, I would love for you to give your social media info, website, all of that good stuff. If anybody is interested in service, I don't know if you guys are taking any new clients like right now, but just share your information if people want to connect with you.
I will. And I also wanted to tell you about something that I'm hosting.
Okay.
It's a teen suicide summit. Um, it was something that came to me when the young lady unfortunately lost her life when she jumped off the bridge. And at that time, it was so heart wrenching for everybody that was involved or not involved because it was a child. And we know
Mm-hmm.
that suicide is preventable. And so I kept seeing the sharing posts and, people, saying their condolences. And I was like, what can I actually do?
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, we don't do enough for our children with mental health.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to get a team together, and we've been actually meeting every other Sunday, um, developing this Teen Suicide Summit. The
Mm-hmm.
Teen Suicide Summit will be held September 10th, 2022 from 9 to 12:30.
Mm-hmm.
The Department of Mental Health is going to open it up. It's free. It's available for parents and children. So the Department of Mental Health will open it up and talk about mental health stigma and shattering the silence. And
Mm-hmm.
then we'll have 4 breakout sessions that your children can choose from: bullying, sexual trauma, faith and spirituality, and LGBT.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll have a team talk panel discussion at the end.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to make sure that the parents actually got something out of it as well. So while the kids are in the team talk panel discussion, the parents can get actual mental health training from certified individuals. David Therapeutic Services has graciously volunteered to actually provide that service or that mental health training to parents. So some of the things that we're talking about today, they will talk to the parents about. And then my hopes also is to have different vendors in the community, that focus on some of those topics, and mental health providers. Because we assume that parents know where to go get help or what type of community resources. So that's what I'm doing. It'll be September 10th at the Hilton on County Line. You can register through Eventbrite, and I'll send you that information too. You can reach me via social media, Instagram, or Facebook, or my website. My social media my social media Instagram handle is Shalonda Carlisle at Shalonda Carlisle. Facebook is Carlisle Counseling and Consulting Services. My website is www.carlisle, CARLISLE, for growth, GROWTH, at .com. And my phone number 601-559-0599.
Awesome, awesome. Yes, guys, mark your calendars for that great summit. I know that it's going to be so informational and so helpful. Thank you for doing that for our community, Shalonda. Please make sure that you keep us posted and send that information about that as well.
I will, and thank you for having me. I truly appreciate it. Like I have said earlier, childhood trauma is something that we have to continue to work on and identifying what childhood trauma actually looks like, and it can be different for each individual.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you for the work that you do, you and your incredible team. And we just appreciate you for out there really, really, working in this space to promote mental health. So thank you for all that you do.
Thank you.